Hey Rob, glad to be here. I'm excited.
Yes, and just to real quickly let everyone know about Lex, before they started working at PowerToFly, Lex worked within the e-commerce industry and started their DEIB journey at birth, but it has 13 years of DEIB related work under their belt and is on our amazing account executive team working with companies like the ones who are our amazing sponsors who are very active in hiring LGBTQIA plus people. So Lex, very excited to dive in a little deeper into some of these topics.
Yes, 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 yes. Me too. Me too.
Well, the what I wanted to start by asking you, Lex, was some of the findings we had for our What Diverse Talent Wants survey. That's a survey we run every year, asking members of the Power to Fly community what they're looking for in a workforce. And there was some pretty striking, surprising, scary responses that we got. And the one I want to really highlight was that 0% of trans and non-binary respondents felt like they had job security. So I want to really ask you, does this number surprise you? And what do you think this is a symbol of on a bigger scale?
I think finding out that 0% of trans and non-binary respondents felt that they, had job security was not only both surprising, but deeply concerning. I think, in my opinion, this highlights several critical issues on a broader scale. I think, when we talk about I am someone who identifies as non-binary. So, within my community, within our community, individuals, facing these challenges in the workplace, including, discrimination in hiring, promotion, daily interactions, this creates that like hostile work environment that threatens their job security, their well-being. I also think when we talk about here in the United States, more primarily, depending on like the states and the locations of where these operations and these people are at, the absence of supported policies leave them vulnerable to discrimination, harassment, unjust termination. This insecurity amplifies mental health concerns such as stress, anxiety. I don't mean to laugh like giggle when I'm saying this stuff, but it's a ripple effect, right? And I think when I get frustrated, I result to a little bit of a haha, but economically, the lack of job security exacerbates like financial instability among these communities as well. We want here at Power to Fly, like we want that uh underrepresented talent to get jobs at companies to care so they have that financial stability, right? Like there's a whole process of kind of our mission with working with underrepresented talent to just kind of highlight that piece. But yeah, I think this ties into a lot of things. It becomes a ripple effect. And then, when we're talking about how to like address these issues, when we're talking about creating that widespread cultural change within the workplace, like really encouraging people, not only just when the HR department or people operations department, everybody at the company, I think has a really good opportunity to advocate for inclusive policies, for diversity training, equitable treatment for all employees. So yeah, I think the survey result serves as a stark reminder of the systematic issues faced by trans and non-binary in the workplace, and yeah, very deeply concerning as
Mhm.
well.
And in those survey results, we had over 60% of respondents said they want even more DEIB training. So I think while a lot of companies are doing the work, the desire from the workforce for additional training is still there. So I think we all know that it is a marathon and not a sprint, and that that work is still very much happening. And that's making me think, here at Power to Fly, we like to say DEIB, and that B is for belonging. This is making me think of some of the things that you mentioned, Lex, because we hear all the time that company culture and company values are very important to talent. And something that is even that's really grown, I think, more since the pandemic, really. I think a lot of people are really looking for companies that are cultural fits for them. So to you, what does it mean to have a sense of belonging in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, as someone who talks to HR, people ops, DEAB teams all the time, they're putting surveys out asking what employees want, and a lot of it is that training or putting together like DEIB committees, ERGs, and so forth. And I think for me, a sense of belonging in the workplace really means that I feel accepted, valued, integral, in, integrated into the makings of what makes the
Mhm.
company like diverse, equitable, inclusive. Because, when you're fostering that inclusive culture where you can be authentic without fear of discrimination, you're going to have people show up as their true selves and feel more, that sense of belonging allows them to have that psychological safety where they can tell you what's going on in their life, how do they need to be supported. At least, for me, that's how I feel. So I think this really just involves like having those supportive relationships, equitable opportunities, and having a strategic organizational commitment to
Mhm.
DEIB rather than just changing our logo during Pride Month,
Yeah.
right? Like there's more that talent wants. I think there's also more that companies need to do in that aspect. And I think you're absolutely right. When we talk about a post-pandemic world, the belonging has become even more crucial. I would say even emphasizing on the flexible work arrangements. One of the things I'll probably end up talking a little bit more out on the call is like the importance of intersectionality. I am a part of the LGBTQIA community, but I'm also a part of the physical disability community. So having that work flexibility is really important. And ultimately, like, I think not for myself, but others, like when you create that sense of belonging, you're ultimately driving employee engagement, retention, productivity. You're going to see that positive and successful work environment,
Mhm.
flourish.
Yeah, and going back to our survey, flexibility was super high. It actually had even increased over the previous year. And actually, later today, we're going to be speaking with Andrea Brianna, the CEO of Rebel Mouse, about working remote while trans and speaking about that. So, if anyone's interested in diving even more into flexibility at work as a queer person, we're going to be talking about that. But you touched on a lot of things just there, Lex, that I'd love to kind of go more into what some concrete steps that businesses can take to create a better sense of belonging for their LGBTQI plus team members. Curious, like employee resource groups, benefits, anything that you can kind of think of that can help really foster that sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when companies like really start to think about this strategically, I highly, highly recommend finding a partner outside of your company so you can have like that unbiased approach. You can also make sure that you're providing that psychological safety to really understand what your employees are asking for, what they need, and then also help you implement all of those things into the company culture. But I think there's a really a variety of different things. That's where I would just kind of like I wanted to hone in on is like really leveraging those external partners. But when creating a better sense of belonging for LGBTQIA members, I think we've kind of mentioned this a few times already, but implementing those inclusive policies and practices. This is going to help establish anti-discrimination, harassment policies. I unfortunately don't have the statistic on me right now, but like we know that harassment within the LGBTQIA community has increased this
Mhm.
year. So even especially with parents of LGBT youth, or vice versa, youth that have LGBT parents. So I think that's something to really hone in on from a policy perspective. Also, when we're talking about those like employee resource groups, this also ties into promoting inclusive language and sensitivity training for all employees. Again, this isn't just for the ERG groups or the people that show up as allies. Like these really need to be company-wide trainings to be able to set that tone for the company and really make sure that folks understand that this is a team effort. It's not just the HR departments or the people operations team to lead this. I would really put that responsibility on like the leadership among departments as well, and have them show up as executive sponsorships for those employee resource groups, making sure that they have allocated budget to be able to deliver on the goals and the needs of those individual groups. Now, not only do should businesses celebrate these communities, and such things as Pride Month, but also really ensuring that you're intentionally, visibly supporting these groups outside of the company as well. I think a lot of things such as or not outside of the company, outside of these groups, such as like healthcare coverage, right? We
Hmm.
talk about those benefits. So this needs to include everything from like LGBT needs to therapy, ensuring that parental leave is all inclusive in that sense. But yeah, I think high level, that's what I would recommend.
No, no, that's all great. I mean, it's making me think, hopefully you were mentioned outside partners, and hopefully for folks who are looking, Power to Fly can be one of those outside partners. But I'm also thinking if you live in a major city, you definitely will have an LGBTQ center in that city. So if you are trying to create some language around that is for trans potential employees, and you might not have a trans employee, but you're looking toward the future, like you can reach out to one of those centers and like see, what is their input on some of the language that you have. Like these are all really great resources. And to tie back to what the conversation we just had with Hunter too, if you work in a virtual space, there's lots of great plugins. We have plugins on Slack that will say, when you say guys, do you want to actually say folks, and other language like, I like to sometimes use crazy, and then it will say, do you really want to use that word? And then you just find yourself, even outside of work, even outside of Slack, changing the way that you speak for the better. So there's all these other tools that you can also put in there. And it's not meant to feel like scolding. It's not, oh, you did something wrong. It's like, it's just there as a reminder to go, oh, maybe take a second to just think about those words that you're using. You're not a bad person if you just use one of these words incorrectly. It's there to just be there to help you learn and help you grow.
100%. And I think, one of the things talking to people that are hiring and looking for those inclusive job descriptions, one of the easiest call outs is to say, I'll see those like he slash she. It's like, okay, I
Hmm.
see that you're
Yeah.
trying to be inclusive to women and not just gender, like the job description for someone who identifies as a male. But, again, I use they, them pronouns. There's a lot of different pronouns out there outside of he, she, and they. So, really ensuring that even as basic as the job descriptions can be, making sure that they're gender neutral.
Hmm. No, that's a great point. And I think if you're applying for a role and you don't see those, you might go, maybe this company isn't for me because this is not something maybe that's at the priority of their culture. Or when you're interviewing for a role, this might be something that you want to bring up, like it's a two-way street interview. Say, hey, I didn't notice this, but I really am passionate about your company. So is this something that you're actively pursuing? Like these are all conversations. And also, if you're applying for a role, that really shows you that you've done your homework and you're like looking into this because people want to see, oh, you're actually invested in this, not just as a passing job, but as a real career. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. And I wanted to talk to you too, Lex, because you're on our sales team. You're looking for us to get some amazing sponsors like the ones we have for this summit. And one thing that kind of shocked me, being someone who lives in New York, which is that Pride NYC, which is the official organization that organizes the Pride March in New York City, which is world famous, of course. But they actually saw a shocking number of corporate sponsors withdraw this year, and of course, we're seeing a lot of anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation around the country, record numbers, in fact. So, knowing this, what can companies do to support and protect their LGBTQ employees, not just when they're in the office, but really all time? Because you mentioned this earlier that some
Yeah.
of us might be in cities where we have lots of protection, but other folks might be in cities where once they leave the office in their home life, they are not as safe.
Yep. No, and I mean, I'm located in Northwest Arkansas, so and lived in Texas for 10 years, born in the South, it's it's unfortunately kind of been the name of the game my entire life. And, I'm in my 30s. But I think there's a couple different ways. And I say this in the sense of I know that there's not going to be, or I would say historically, there may have not been companies that have felt willingly to publicly oppose discrimination laws. But the reality of it is like, I would say in the past 3 years, we've seen a massive push where when companies do oppose discrimination laws, we actually do see change, right? Because
Totally.
what happens, right? Like companies bring in the money. When you have money and jobs, people move into that area. Then you have cities and states that benefit and positively or negatively, depending on kind of the situation. But I think this is where I feel comfortable challenging companies to be publicly opposed to discrimination laws. Not only is this going to show your employees that you care about them, but you're publicly speaking out to them, right? We're going beyond just changing our logo during Pride Month. I think really being able to advocate for LGBT rights and being able to implement and enforce inclusive policies provides comprehensive health benefits not only to your employees but to the entire community. And then that also results into like creating safer spaces. Hopefully within your company, you have ERG groups, you have other community events that maybe the company can sponsor, their local pride.
Hmm.
To your point, there's even like different LGBT chambers of commerce locally that people could reach out to and see if there's any volunteer opportunities. I know here in our local community, we have a couple companies that will invite, members of the community come speak and educate. Then they're able to like volunteer or become a board member of their nonprofit. So there's, I think, a lot of ways that companies can get creative in making sure that their employees um, and their own community is like aware of the opportunities that they're creating by having these conversations.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
making me
this,
think like if you were doing a Pride Month event or any event, maybe you get it catered by a local LGBTQ organization, business, and you can find
yep.
out those businesses going back to the centers I mentioned earlier. You could go to them. We just recently had a Juneteenth ch talk, and our speakers were saying they had their events all catered by local Black-owned businesses. They actually combined it with Pride Month event, so it was actually Black queer-owned businesses. So that's a great way to support a business locally and really then also hear the feedback directly from some folks that are in the community.
Yeah. And you had mentioned at the beginning of the call, I have an e-commerce background. And one of the things I really enjoyed about working in e-commerce were during certain months, the company would highlight their like LGBT companies on the platform. Or if it was like Black History Month, it would be like, here are our Black businesses. So, there's a lot of different ways to not only support your employees, but your clients. And ultimately that affects the community. And I think, it really just demonstrates the commitment to fostering an inclusive and supportive environment.
Totally agree. So, we mentioned a bunch of other resources. You have your local communities, you have companies like PowerToFly, but what other resources, Lex, would you recommend to people who are looking to improve their sense of belonging and really learn more about current LGBTQIA issues? Because there is a lot of bad information out there as well.
Yes. And I think, that is such a good point. When you find something that is an inclusive resource, such as like for the LGBTQIA community, really making sure that that source is true to the community and speaking our truth. And I think, to be able to stay informed with current LGBT issues, um, following individuals, explore certain books, podcasts. There are books by LGBT authors like Audre Lorde, Roxane Gay. I'm a big podcast person, so follow me on LinkedIn and we can share podcasts. But uh, there's a podcast called Nancy and then Making Gay History. I think, Making Gay History is great because not only does it talk about the actual history of the queer community, but it talks about real time events. We're making gay history in real time. So that's definitely something to explore. There are probably a million online forums that you can also join. I know even here in Northwest Arkansas, we have a lot of great Northwest Arkansas LGBT groups. We have Pride this weekend, and we have Big Frida coming. So it truly is like get plugged into your own community, and you'll be able to kind of learn directly more about what it's like to be, in the South and queer and within corporate work. I think it can be really interesting. Now, I talked about intersectionality earlier in the conversation, and this is where I personally love just kind of chatting with anybody about this stuff, but you could literally take any of your own special interest. I uh can go, I mean, Rob, I think you and I have talked about Eurovision, right? Like
Yes.
there's like we could take any special interest that we have and type in like Eurovision LGBT, and we will find something within Eurovision that has like a queer intersect, right?
Well,
So I
Eurovision is basically just one big queer intersect. Yes.
exactly. And so I mean you could do that with like football. I'm
Hmm.
blanking on his name, but there is a football player that came out as gay years ago. And I think a lot of people forget that we do have someone that's, publicly out as a football player. And then other sports or NASCAR. I mean, the list goes on, right?
Hmm.
But I challenge people to go to Google, type in your special interests, type LGBT next to it, see what pops up. Obviously want it to be like positive where you could actually learn good stuff from it, but I'm pretty confident that you'd probably find something that would be of interest, and then that way you're like, oh, the LGBT community has a similar interest than like me, and then you can further kind of your learnings around that.
Yeah, and I think I love that, Lex, and I think it's great for businesses, companies that are looking to do stuff. Like I am not a sports gay, but but I know there's plenty of people, and like maybe your ERG organizes a field day or going
Yep.
out to a game, and like I could easily see someone at their company going, "Oh, I don't fit in with the other people who love sports." But then, like, as soon as a business opens up and says, "Oh, like, look at all these other people that are here," that then it goes back to that psychological safety we were talking. All of a sudden, you feel like, "Oh, I'm not alone. I feel so much safer at my work in my community." So I love this, and there's so many great resources. And I think on a national level, like as long as if you're looking to an organization like GLAAD or the Human Rights Campaign organization, companies that or organizations that have been around for a while and have a deep bench, and then you always know at least I'm getting trusted information from those resources. But before we let you go to Lex, I'd just love to also talk about, action steps that people can take. So a lot of people, a lot of companies are daunted, I would say, by going, oh, these are so big things that we're talking about. Where do I start? Maybe you're a small organization. Maybe you're just an individual or not. Maybe you are an individual contributor watching this and you say, oh, I want to make that change at my company, but I'm not even a manager. How do I make that change? So, what are some action steps, even if they're small action steps that people can take today, this week, when this summit is done, to really make a difference in supporting workplace belonging?
Yeah. Well, one, do what I had mentioned, put in your special interest in Google, see what kind of community within the LGBT community overlaps with that. Maybe volunteer, join a newsletter, really start to understand and read through some material. But one of my favorite action steps to recommend to people who are very new to this, are showing up as an ally, aren't really comfortable making, big changes at the moment because they're still learning how to make those internal changes and small team changes. What I would recommend is for you to really start creating that sense of belonging within the workplace is one, actively listen to people that are
Hmm.
in like marginalized groups, underrepresented talent at your community, listen to them, and then also amplify their voices. So one of my favorite examples is like, say you're in a meeting, even if it's an all org meeting, if somebody who's underrepresented or historically underrepresented speaks up, they're not heard, maybe you help like interrupt the meeting, say, hey, Lex, you were starting to say this. Could you repeat it so everyone can hear you? Uh, Putting yourselves in the position where you're creating space for people to be heard, where you're amplifying their voices rather than speaking for them, right? That's really important to
Mhm.
amplify underrepresented talent voices or employees within the workplace. This involves ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to contribute their perspectives and ideas, particularly those who may not always feel heard or included, by consciously making space for diverse viewpoints, showing a genuine interest and understanding of their different lived experiences, thought process. Individuals can foster more inclusive environments where all employees are valued and respected.
I love that. Yeah, even while I am a gay queer man, I also am a cisgendered white man. So I always have to tell myself, okay, Rob, and I have no trouble speaking, as you can see. So I always tell myself in meetings, okay, Rob, don't be the first person to raise your hand with like an idea or feedback. Like sit back, let some other people go. So I do have to like it goes back to some of the things we were saying earlier. You do have to train your brain a bit if you are like me and you don't have a problem speaking out, you go, okay, let some other folks there. And it's making me think too, there's great tools. One of the companies that is participating in our job fair this week is Culture Amp. And that is a great tool that you can use that if you aren't one of those people that want to speak up in a meeting, but you'd prefer to maybe fill out a form and something that can go to your leader in that way, like Culture Amp could be a great tool that you can use that to really gather feedback. Reminds me of actually how we started this conversation, Lex, and you were mentioning kind of getting feedback from your teams. And I think you really can't start anywhere. You can't take that first step until you actually know what step that you need to take. We were talking about our survey, and the only reason we're able to kind of have this conversation is we're have that data about what the community actually feels. So I would say start with collecting that feedback there.
Of course. And as I also had mentioned, really ensuring that you're using outside partners to collect that information also really helps ensure that you're creating that psychological safety, because you're going to have employees feel more comfortable, even if it's like anonymously providing that feedback to PowerToFly. We'll then be able to work with you strategically on reviewing that material, showcasing our findings, but also help you implement those changes that are need to be had.
And we're gonna move into our next speaker. I'm super excited to hear from Gail from Salesforce. But before we let you go, Lex, if people want to find out more about Power to Fly and how we can become a partner, or they just want to get your podcast recommendations, where should they reach out to you?
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just as my name is spelled here, Lex Keaton, Lexkeaton. But I'm on LinkedIn. I am on there all the time, so feel free to reach out if you are interested in leveraging Power to Fly services or any other LGBT recommendations. Happy to provide.